My name is Charles Barker, and joining me tonight are Commissioner Krista Nash and Executive Director Jeff Brown. Before we begin, we just want to thank our Public Engagement and Education Committee. We would not be able to host these public hearings without you, and to the staff that is responsible for putting these together. We do want to recognize all the hard work you put into these hearings. We also want to thank the people. We want to thank you for joining, taking time out of your busy schedule. You could be doing anything right now, but you are on the call here with us, and we definitely appreciate that. The purpose of tonight's meetings, as many of you may know, is to solicit public input about how cannabis tax revenue should be used. We know that certain communities have been devastated by the war on drugs and the decriminalization of discriminatory policies and practices. And so it is imperative that we continue to hear from you, continue to host these public hearings so that the legislature and governor can be guided by you about how tax revenue should be allocated. And that is the key caveat that I do want to express at the outset. The CRC does not control the allocation of revenue. As you will soon hear, we are responsible for hearing from you, compiling that feedback and drafting a report, and then sharing that report with the governor and the legislature for them to make a decision on how that money is to be used. Before we begin, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items. After you hear from me, Executive Director Brown will share some brief remarks, as he usually does during our public hearings, just to provide some updates and give the public an understanding of operations. After that, we will go into some statutory background to explain to the public the process guiding the public hearings, talk a little bit about the social equity excise fee, and then we'll turn it over to you to hear your comments. And so without further ado, Director Brown.
Thank you, Commissioner Barker, and thank you, Commissioner Nash, for helping to host these meetings. So here at the New Jersey Cannabis Regulatory Commission, our mission is to establish and grow a responsible, regulated medicinal and recreational cannabis industry. We do that by applying the values of safety and equity, and we center our work around creating and protecting access for patients, production of safe products, and promoting diversity and inclusion in the industry to develop a national model for sensible, fair oversight. But our work to establish the cannabis industry is not the end all be all. A critical piece to that are these hearings and hearing from the public and understanding, helping other policymakers understand how tax revenue raised by the cannabis industry should be invested in the state of New Jersey. And I wanted to just note that you can trace there's a direct line from these hearings last year to the first investment that's been made with cannabis tax revenue. So last year during these hearings, the Commissioner Barker, Commissioner Nash held, some of the key comments were about access to capital issues that entrepreneurs were having, as well as the need for technical assistance to help people through the licensing process. And I know the commissioners are going to cover a little more on that later, but in the first quarter recreational sales, there was about $220,000 raised by the social equity excise fee. All that money and then some have gone to the creation of a technical assistance program that is, has some components of it that are first in the nation. So the feedback tonight is critical to help us develop recommendations on how this money should be spent and spent to the best benefit of the public and individuals who have been negatively impacted by the criminalization of marijuana in the past. So with that, I'll turn it back to Commissioner Barker, Commissioner Nash. Thank you all for taking your time out of your evening to come share your comments with us. And back to you, Commissioner Barker.
Thank you, Director Brown. Thank you for your support to the committee, helping us move the public hearings along. And just so before we begin and turn it over to you, public, we just, as mentioned earlier, want to go over a few statutory requirements to give you a little background about the process. Next slide. And so according to the statute, the commission is charged with holding at least 3 regional public hearings each fiscal year. So far, I believe this is hearing number 4 for this fiscal year. We had 3 previous meetings in the middle of November, as many of you touched on, during the League of Municipalities and other major cannabis events. And so we're back here again because, as Director Brown said, it is imperative that we hear from you. Next slide, please. After the hearings, the CRC is charged with reviewing and compiling the data, and then drafting a recommendation report based on that data and feedback from the public to then share with the governor and the legislature. Next slide, please. And then the governor and the legislature, what the legislature more specifically, is then charged with allocating the revenue and informing the commission. As Director Brown touched on, during our last fiscal year, the social equity excise fee revenue was allocated towards our New Jersey Business Action Center, which Commissioner Nash will touch on later in the program. Next slide, please. And so we just wanted to provide a brief overview of some of the high-level recommendations that the public shared with us during our last round of during last year's round of public hearings in March of 2022. Some of the major takeaways were economic development and justice reinvestment. A lot of the public comments centered around access to capital and technical assistance, things that we're humble and thankful to say we've worked on and are now seeing the fruits of that labor in an NJBAC first of its kind in the nation program, and an NJEDA program that may also be a first of its kind in the nation program. And again, I will let Commissioner Nash touch on that later in the program. Justice reinvestment was probably the most common, if not the most common theme. The public did not want to see cannabis tax revenue be used for law enforcement purposes, considering the considerable investment that New Jersey has already committed to law enforcement and the war on drugs, and considering the impact that it's had on people who we are trying to rehabilitate and get into the marketplace. Next slide, please. We also heard a lot about public health, expanding healthcare services, mental health services, harm reduction services, Black maternal health centers, workforce development and education was a major component also of the feedback. We're happy to say that since the report, we are happy to see NJDOL work to establish partnerships with our community colleges. That can be a great pathway potentially for a robust, equitable, and inclusive workforce development program. And so these were just some of the key highlights that Commissioner Nash is going to touch on a few more ideas later in the program, but we just wanted to give you that high-level overview of what was shared last year during our recommendation report. Just a quick recap. The CRC has been operational for just roughly 20 months, I believe, a little over a year and a half. In that time, we continue to make strides in advancing an equitable and inclusive marketplace, as Director Brown alluded to. And I just want to touch on that the upcoming rule proposal is hopefully going to expand opportunities in the marketplace, add our wholesale distribution and delivery service license opportunities, which hopefully will add even more overall tax revenue, and then overall cannabis sales revenue, and then in addition, increase the pool of tax revenue that can be committed towards social equity investments. Next slide, please. And we just want to continue to evidence our commitment to prioritizing equity and inclusion. Please refer to our website or the QR code on the screen to review the economically disadvantaged areas and impact zones that highlight the communities and areas that really need significant reinvestment. And we hope a lot of tax revenue is allocated accordingly. Next slide, please. A quick market update to expound upon that. We have received in that year and a half, 20 months window, we received over 1,600 applications, issued 945 licenses, and we continue to work towards increasing those numbers equitably and inclusively. A major highlight from this slide that I want to touch on, and I don't want to be underscored, is so far in just 2 quarters, the New Jersey CRC has been able to, the cannabis industry has been able to generate just under $12 million in tax revenue. Many of you have read the press releases and saw the news updates that a little under $200 million in sales has been generated in Q2 and Q3. And so we see that New Jersey has the potential for a robust market opportunity. At the same time, our social equity excise fee represents a significantly less portion of that. It's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so to Director Brown's point, we were thankful that the complete amount of revenue from last fiscal year and then some was able to be contributed towards technical assistance, to a robust technical assistance program. But we do want to highlight that that is not going to be enough to meet the charges that the public is putting before us. And we are going to need dollars, we're going to need dollars allocated creatively and equitably if we're going to meet the charges and we're going to meet the recommendations that the public is sharing with us. Additionally, ATCs are beginning to expand. And so we want to highlight that because in addition to the dispensaries already now operational, we're hopeful with the recent licensure of conversion applications and annual applications, in addition to the ATCs that are going to hopefully onboard into the adult use space, we will be able to, again, generate that much more cannabis sales that will create that much more cannabis tax revenue that can be used for social equity investments. Next slide, please. Great question. Where is the money going? Right, we touched on that, but where does the money go? All the tax revenue that we're collecting, where does it go and who's responsible? And so I'm going to highlight that briefly and then turn it over to Commissioner Nash. But the money goes to a cream fund. And the cream fund was created in statute. And next slide, please. The cream fund is where almost all tax revenue, fees and penalties will be deposited. Next slide. Just want to go over a few high level provisions governing the allocation of cannabis tax revenue. So at the outset, at least no less than 70% of all tax revenue is to be used for investments in impact zones. Now, the legislature identified impact zones as socially and economically disadvantaged areas, harmed by the failed war on drugs. Our highlight here is that it's imperative that impact zones that have been hardest hit are highlighted. We have heard from the public that the complete list of impact zones does not accurately reflect communities hardest hit by the failed war on drugs. And so we just want to highlight to the legislature and governor to please focus on communities hardest hit to ensure that an appropriate and equitable allocation goes to those communities. There is 15% of the fund shall be committed towards underage deterrence and prevention. This is critical because it further evidences the CRC's commitment to safety and protecting the youth. And so we hope to use this money to really advance programs, educational activities and the like to ensure the safety and security of our youth and our products, as Director Brown alluded to. Direct financial assistance to qualifying persons cannot be underscored. We've heard that time and time again from the public. The CREAM Fund allows the legislature to allocate money for direct financial assistance for qualifying persons. These are our guaranteed basic income programs, our UBI programs. Programs like this that allocate revenue to low-income individuals to assist them with needs in order to maintain a livable, everyday lifestyle for their family. This is critical, and we see it across the country. We also see it here in New Jersey. There's some of our major metropolises, some of our major cities already have these programs underway, and we're seeing the fruits of those programs benefiting those low income and hardest hit communities and individuals and families. And so we hope that the legislature really considers that. Again, operational calls to regulate our industry. Director Brown has touched on this. We share this in meetings. Even the public has expressed the need to hire and build out the CRC so we can manage and maintain and develop the industry. And so that is something that the fund allows the legislature to appropriate funding for. We can't bury the lead here. Statutorily, the CRC is charged with attributing funds for drug recognition expert programs. We understand how that conflicts with the public's request that no cannabis tax revenue be used for law enforcement purposes. We strongly suggest that the public really commit to communicating to their legislative representatives, local representatives, to make that heard to the people who can make that change statutorily. And then any remaining monies, if there are any remaining monies, considering the amount of funds that we need, it shall be deposited into the state's general fund for general purposes. But that was just a high-level overview that we wanted to share regarding the CREAM Fund and how money can be allocated accordingly based on the statute. And I'll turn it over to Commissioner Nash, who will go into further detail about the social equity excise fee.
Thank you, Commissioner Barker. I just wanted to start by sharing a fact that I thought was interesting and speaks to why we're here tonight. So the US cannabis industry is projected to be worth $100 billion by 2030. Yet those most affected by what is called the war on drugs or war on people face significant barriers to entry. According to a 2021 report from Marijuana Business Daily, the percentage of executive positions held by women and minorities in cannabis fell to 30% and 13% respectively. To combat this, programs focused on social equity have become a crucial resource to help marginalized communities participate in the legal cannabis industry. Next slide. The CREAM Act, as Commissioner Barker mentioned, addresses this issue, among other issues, through a social equity excise fee. And the excise fee is a per ounce flat rate fee assessed on all cannabis cultivated and sold in New Jersey's recreational cannabis market. Next slide. The Commission adopted regulations on August 19th, 2021, and we set the social equity excise fee at $1.10 per ounce, which is the statutorily required rate based on 1/3 of 1% per the average retail price of cannabis. And just to note, the fee is not imposed on a transfer by a cannabis cultivator to another cannabis cultivator or to a licensed medical ATC for use in medical cannabis. Beginning January 1st, 2023, the fee was increased to $1.52 per ounce. Next slide. So this chart shows the parameters of the fees that can be imposed. And as you can see, the price drops. When the price drops per ounce, the fee can be increased. Next slide. As Commissioner Barker mentioned, all excise fees will be deposited into the CREAM Fund to be used for annual appropriations in social equity investments in impact zones, and there may be overlap with opportunity zones, urban enterprise zones, Main Street municipalities, and New Jersey Redevelopment Authority designated municipalities. Next slide. So I want to just talk about some ways that tax revenue can support individuals and communities. Next slide. So these are examples of what the monies can be used for. At the public hearings held in March of last year, participants highlighted, among other things, the challenges involved in accessing capital for cannabis businesses and the need for technical assistance to support entrepreneurs in this nascent industry here in New Jersey. In response, funds generated from the social equity excise fee were allocated, as mentioned before, to the New Jersey Business Action Center, which established a program to provide free educational courses, technical assistance in building business plans, and completing aspects of license applications, as well as mentorship opportunities to these new cannabis business owners. In addition, the New Jersey Economic Development Authority announced in December of 2022 funding for a cannabis equity grant program. So although social equity excise fee funds were not used for this new initiative, it is anticipated that monies will be designated to boost the grant program funding as the social equity fund revenues increase. Next slide. So these are just some more examples of programs that can be funded to support individuals and the communities they live in. Next slide. So there are many possibilities to share your vision, and we welcome those here this evening at our upcoming public meeting on Thursday or next Wednesday at our final hearing. Next slide. I will now turn it over to Director Blake for the public comment period. Director Blake.
Good evening, everyone. We have only a small group of people registered to speak today, but we'll still ask that you keep your comments as close to 3 minutes as possible. If there's more time, we'll allow other people who did not register to speak at the when we have gone through the list. So please listen for your name, raise your hand in the app, and I will call on you. Diana McElroy, Isaiah Friday, Summer Westerber. Summer, go ahead.
Hello, commissioners and staff. My name is Summer Westerber. I am the owner of Divine Greens, New Jersey. I'm a woman-owned social equity retail license applicant. As a social equity operator, I deeply appreciate how the state has prioritized social equity through licensing and your inclusion of the social equity fee. How you decide to spend this money is obviously very important. So thank you for having this discussion today. As you mentioned earlier, has come up in other meetings. I think capital is still the #1 barrier for social equity applicants. This process has obviously been very expensive. Both Colorado and California also created social equity grants to assist social equity applicants. In Colorado, I think for the dispensary, for the lounges, there are $25,000 grants. So these can be used for licensing and application fees, legal fees, and other startup fees. So I think while it doesn't solve the larger problem of unequal access to capital, it can provide critical assistance to social equity operators. And I also would say I don't think they should be based on FICO scores, since there's a tangible asset that can be recovered. Thank you for your work on this issue. It's appreciated.
Thank you for your comment. Diana McElroy. Go ahead. Diana? You're still muted.
Guys, can you
Yeah,
can
there
you
we
hear
go.
me? I apologize.
Mhm.
Thank you for hosting these meetings. They're very important. I love reading the list that you have of suggested revenue and where it should go. I would also recommend one thing that I don't see on here is education for parents as well as kids on the dangers within the new industry being more available. I know that's one of the subcategories, but I don't see it laid out as the list. Education is critical in this industry. I think because there have been so many people impacted, re-entry programs are vital. As are child education, early childhood education. If you start early in impacted zones, studies have proven that their lives will improve and generationally lives will be improved. So thank you for the opportunity to speak and continue the good work you're doing.
Thank you, Diana. Isaiah Friday, Nina Allen, Ron Hine, Brian Everett. I see Ron Hine. Go ahead and speak. Ron, go ahead.
Yes. Hi, my name is Ron Hine. I'm the co-chair of the Reparations Task Force at the UU Faith Action, a statewide coalition of 21 congregations of Unitarian Universalist churches in Cherry Hill. And I want to thank the commission for this hearing. We believe that the historic legislation that was passed in 2020 makes clear that all the revenues generated need to go to those municipalities, is what was mentioned earlier. And I'm really glad that that is being a primary focus. I certainly hope that this excise tax, though, does not sort of cloud the issue that the other tax revenues should also be allocated to these efforts also. We need to prioritize these communities through the programs that you've already discussed here. It's a clear and committed approach for these funds need to be established from the very beginning so good practices can be established. I've been around long enough to see that funds have been, diverted for many purposes, and the legislature needs to be apprised of that and reminded of that. And the commission is going to be in a very powerful position to make sure that these funds are not diverted in any way, shape, or form. The legislature does strange things sometimes when it gets into the allocation process. And so we need to make sure that our interests are taken care of. There's lots of good organizations that are out there that are performing these roles very well. I'm from down in Cherry Hill. I'm familiar with an organization called HopeWorks, which is a Camden-based nonprofit social enterprise. And they use technology and entrepreneurship to get young adults who come into their, earning maybe $400 a year, and they leave after having training, earning over $43,000 a year. That's the HopeWorks difference. That's how we can get kids educated. And that, I think, is one of the things that we need to be taking a look at, programs like that throughout the state in these underserved communities. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Isaiah Friday, Nina Allen, Brian Everett. Go ahead, Brian.
All right, hello, my name is Brian Everett. I live in Glendora, New Jersey, and I'm a medical marijuana patient myself. I wanted to recommend a thoughtful consideration for developing a formulaic process for distributing cannabis tax revenue to municipalities based upon their experienced trauma with the war on drugs. I envision this formulaic process to determine the approximate top 10 most impacted cities or towns in the state And from there, a 10-year schedule to be established by which each of those cities will receive the overwhelming majority of the fiscal year's tax earnings, for that place to then produce plans and be them community-based plans for the construction of new school buildings in partnership with other state level and federal level programs for school funding construction. I recommend the above because it takes too long to realize results of such tax distributions when they're thinly dispersed across the state. Piecemeal funding simply will not build the new school buildings which are needed yesterday. Cherry Hill Township Schools, for example, which is a public schools district in a very affluent town. I lived there for 27 years, and I'm a proud graduate of High School West. The voters there just passed a bond referendum last year for close to $400 million for various structural projects. And these projects were desperately needed because of the deferred maintenance, and they were also needed across all buildings in the district. Those projects that will be funded through the $400 million bond referendum will take care of problems that are there today, such as fixing bathrooms that haven't been updated since the buildings were built in the 1960s and 70s. But those $400 million will likely be needed to be asked for once again from taxpayers for the new structural issues that arise 10 years from now. And that's Cherry Hill. In more chronically disadvantaged places such as Camden, which has suffered from decades of disinvestment, I've seen previous schools in the city with no usable water, lead in the water, no heat, no air conditioning. And it took the state to come in and build a new high school for Camden because the tax base simply would never have been there to build that school. So I would love for this tax to be used in a formulaic way to build a new school building for Trenton or Newark, Atlantic City, and other places across the state that have suffered from the war on drugs and other forms of disinvestment over the past 60 or 70 years. Thanks.
Thank you, Brian. Isaiah Friday, Nina Allen, Cheryl Fitzer Addis, Joshua Alb, Margarita Leahy. Margarita, go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Margarita Leahy, and I'm representing Mercer Council on Alcoholism and Drug Addiction. In reference to the June 30th report, on page 6, you reference youth services. And what you're describing in there sounds very much like the school-based youth services programs that already exists, some of them in impact zones, which has now lost funding by DCF. So in about 15 months, those programs that are providing prevention, providing protective factors, teaching skills, doing prevention work with parents, embedding mental health counselors in those school districts is now not going to be funded anymore. So that would be one area to look at. The other would be scholarships for minority college students that are going into the field of addiction medicine or substance use disorder counseling or prevention. We have very few certified prevention specialists in the state. So that would be really great. Finding bilingual minority college students would be great. And the other thing that we find a problem with is finding pediatric early intervention support services. Right now, what you can find is 18 and older. And if you go looking for anybody who works with youth or middle schoolers, there's a wait list. So those are some areas from having read the report that could really use funding. Thank you.
Thank you. Isaiah Friday, Nina Allen, Joshua Alb, Paula Pelkey, Edward Lefty Grimes. Paula, go ahead.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts this evening on the use of the social equity excise fee. My name is Paula Pelkey and I work with Cannabis Equity Employment out of Lambertville. Working with CEE, I've had the opportunity to discuss equity with many different people in the burgeoning cannabis industry. The sheer amount of work happening in the industry right now is truly astounding. And with that, there is much discussion about equity, but sadly, there's not much follow through in establishing beneficial programs that embody true equity. According to the NJCRC website, over $200 million came into the state during 2022 through the legal sale of cannabis. The report recommendations for social equity excise fee investments states that the amount of funds allocated from those sales to be just under $200,000. I find that this amount of money is truly underwhelming and that the state is only offering the equivalent of a mid-level manager's salary. And that's supposed to be split up with all these proposed programs. And, you know, that's a little bit laughable. This amount of money is less than $1 per person in high impact municipalities. And that's truly unacceptable. If state of New Jersey really wants to lead the way for cannabis social equity, then of course a substantially larger percentage of the taxes needs to be allocated. It's great that the CRC continually wishes to engage in discourse about equity, but people need to see that you all are really hearing what we're saying and creating a megaphone for our needs and what we're expressing that we want to do with this money. So many communities have been impacted by the war on drugs and require assistance to get their needs met. These needs have been outlined in the previous forms and are clearly listed in the report that the CRC has produced, summarizing the current suggestions for the fee investments. But let's move past lip service and progress into action. The action will require more money. I understand that the CRC does not dictate how much money gets allocated. However, again, the CRC is our megaphone. And we really need you all to, you know, come to the bat for us and really make sure that it's understood that this amount of money being allocated is really just not going to cut it. With that said, initially, I'd like to see the funds go to support reentry programming in high impact municipalities. Those who have been incarcerated for cannabis should receive funds to help them transition from the prison system. And those funds should be used in best efforts to have their records expunged of any nonviolent cannabis convictions. The cannabis plant heals people, and the use of taxes and fees taken from the sale of cannabis should be doing the same. We really need New Jersey to heal its people, and cannabis can help do that. Thanks once again for the chance to be heard. And my name is Paula Pelkey, and I work with Cannabis Equity Employment out of Lambertville.
Thank you, Paula. Lefty, go right ahead.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Hi, this is Edward Lefty Grimes. I'm with sativacross.org. We're a 501c3 here in New Jersey, fighting for cannabis patients' rights and disability rights. I want to thank the commission for allowing disabled people to take part remotely. It's very important that people can take part from their wheelchairs, from their home, if they're homebound. And this is very important that they can do this. So thank you for that. I want to talk about social equity and how I believe it's a sham, because as long as there's people like Anthony Diaz in chains for growing a plant in Hackensack, there is no social equity. Anthony Diaz is a name that I'm not going to let get swept under the rug. Anthony Diaz is a Black man in chains for growing cannabis for cancer. He was growing 50 plants in his backyard. And if you know how to make FECO oil, fully extract cannabis oil, you need 1 pound a month. So he was literally growing a year's worth of his cannabis to treat cancer. Nobody in the sound of my voice wants Anthony Diaz to be in chains for growing cannabis, but yet there he is. The CRC is limited in what they can do for Anthony Diaz. I understand that. There are recommendations that you can make to all three bodies. You can make recommendations to the legislative branch, the executive branch, and as a friend of the court, you can also make recommendations to the judicial branch on behalf of Anthony Diaz, a Black man in chains for growing cannabis for cancer. I'm not going to let people forget his name, because this is what social equity is. People like Anthony Diaz growing cannabis for cancer, and he's in chains. But yet we're allowed to grow cannabis for money in Jersey, but yet for cancer, it gets put in chains. I know that you're limited on what you can do. What you can do is put a fund together, a defense fund for any cannabis patient that's caught growing cannabis, they should have a defense fund for people like Anthony Diaz, who cannot afford an attorney. He's going to be swept under the rug and lost in the system unless we help him. So I think we can help him in that way, a defense fund for any patient that's caught growing cannabis, any minority, anybody who's growing cannabis should have a defense fund set up by the CRC. And thank you. And let's not forget about Anthony Diaz, please. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Isaiah Friday, Nina Allen, Cheryl Fitzer Addis, Joshua Alb. Are any of those people present? Joshua Alb, I see you. Go ahead.
Hello, thank you for having me today. My name is Josh Alb. I am the founder of Cannademics. We are a leading cannabis community and education platform here in the Garden State. We've been doing work for a number of years now across the state, from educational and seminars and events to hiring events, expungement clinics, licensing clinics, educating universities and the community as a whole for a long time, as well as leading a number of protests over the summers of 2020 and participating in social and economic reform in New Jersey as well as in New York. I wanted to get a chance to speak today on the tax, and the number of dollars allocated is obviously too small, but not only that, I feel as though, it makes it very difficult for equity operators to be established as a whole if, there is no provisions from the CRC being given, or there is no help in order for these operators to go into municipalities and seek and obtain municipal approval as a whole. As well as the fact that with the definition of reparations for many is lost, and we need to keep in mind that these dollars can be used outside of, just necessarily cannabis and getting people cannabis businesses or jobs. And it's really about, the total community's upbuilding, right? Now, these dollars can go towards infrastructure. These dollars can go towards healthcare, housing, water, like here in Newark for the issues that we have. So I just want to keep in mind that there's a much bigger picture when it comes to legalization and economic reform as a whole, and that there's just a lot of missing pieces right now that, I think the CRC has done a good job so far trying to at least, implement something. However, I believe that the direction is lost, and, as well as the fact that there is no provisions to assist with legacy operators converting the legal ones. And again, then that municipal approval for them to do that, like the state approval process is going to be easier for them than municipalities, and that's where there needs to be the most assistance going if you truly do want to see operators come up. And that's pretty much all I got to say today. I want to thank you for having me and letting me get my piece in, and appreciate the opportunity to speak for my community.
Thank you. Isaiah Friday, Nina Allen, Cheryl Fitzer Addis. That represents, Commissioner Barker, the totality of those who have registered to speak. We will open the floor to anyone who may not have registered, but who is present and would like to comment for the record. Just raise your hand. Not seeing any raised hands, that would conclude our public comment portion of this meeting.
Thank you, Director Blake. Just want to thank the public for those thoughtful and heartfelt comments. We appreciate that. Your passion, your purpose, the reasoning behind your recommendations is not lost on us. And so we ask that you continue to hold us accountable, continue to share your thoughts and concerns. As Commissioner Nash alluded to, we have a meeting this upcoming Thursday. Please join us there to share your thoughts. And if you can't join us this coming Thursday, please join us next Wednesday for the final installment of this round of public hearings. Thank you, and have a blessed evening.
Good night. Thank you for joining us.